What's up everyone and welcome back to our design system series. Today we're jumping into phase 2 of the series and looking at components from now on. We're still going to use everything that we've built so far, but don't worry if you haven't done it because you can always just jump in from the middle. As usual, you've got your exercise file in the description below, so feel free to follow along, and you also have a link to sign up to Figma if you've never used it before. Let's jump in. We're going to start off with building the most used component in the books, and that is a button. We all have them. Every design system component library has one. To create our button today, we're going to go with an 8-step system. We're going to plan it, build it, color it, variable it, maximize it, name it, component it, and prototype it. And at the end, we will have 240 buttons to work with. So without further ado, let's jump into step 1, plan it. Now, what I mean by plan it is the boring step that no one wants to do, but it's basically trying to scope out what do we want? How many types of button do we want? What are we going to use from Figma in order to do them? So you have this little table in your file. You can change it around if you want, but my suggestion is we're going to have 2 types of buttons, a primary and a secondary. They'll be differentiated by color. We're going to have a few different states for the button. Then we're going to have one that's a complete pill shape and one that is just rounded corners. We're going to have 3 sizes, small, medium, and large. We're going to have a label, and that is just going to be a text component property. And then we're going to have an icon, and we can have an icon on the left, on the right, no icon, or just icon. So no label at all, just an icon. And then we're just going to use the icon as an instance swap. So that's my step 1, and I'd really recommend you do this as well, either using my one or just plan it by yourself. It will just make your design process a lot quicker. Step number 2, build it. Now, the first thing we're going to need is the text, right? Because every single button is going to have text. So I'm going to click on T, tap in, and just type label. Don't worry about the text too much for now. I'm just going to change it to 16, so it's a bit bigger. That is going to be one version of our button, right? So most likely it's going to be inside of an auto layout, so I can control the padding and all of that. So I'll just add that now, Shift and A, and I've got my auto layout. I'm okay leaving it with the default values for now because I know later the variables are going to control this, so it's fine. So this is our simple button. Now let's add in an icon. I'm going to duplicate this, so just holding down Option and Shift and then just dragging it out. I'm going to go into my icons, and these are icons I made in a separate video. I'll link that video here, but you can also just get any icons from a plugin or from a library or anything you want. I'm going to select my star icon over here, so I'm just going to copy it and paste it inside of my auto layout. So I stated before that I want to have 4 different versions of icon. So no icon, I made that here. Then I want icon on the right. I'm going to duplicate it again, Option and Shift, icon on the left. So I'll just select the star and then use the left arrow to move it. And then one where it's just the icon. So I'll copy that again and then just delete the label. Great. So these are the 4 variations of my button. Now we need to move on to the next step, which is color it. And in color it, we can start looking at primary versus secondary and all of the different states. So the first row of buttons, these are going to be my primary buttons in the default state. So I'm going to use my semantic colors that are kind of my brand colors. I'll go into the fills and just scroll down till I get to that collection. There we go. And in the surfaces, I've got a light, a subtle, a default, and a darker. I think I'm just going to use default. That looks great. Now, obviously right now the text isn't really legible and the icons aren't either, so I'm going to change them. If you remember, you did create a negative grayscale text, which is precisely for that when it's on a darker background. But basically all you need is a lighter color that pops up against that brand color. So this is how my primary default button is going to look. Now let's create the hover state. I'm going to select them all, duplicate them, so holding down Option and Shift down here. Now I think when I hover over, I want the background to go a bit lighter. So I'm going to select a lighter color, I think lighter. Yeah, that works. And if you don't have all these colors set up, that's fine. Just keep choosing colors as you go along. Now, that's our hover state. Let's look at focus now. So focused is that kind of split second where you're selecting the item before you let go with your mouse. So let's duplicate this, Option and Shift, drag it down. I think, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go with the default color, but I'll add a stroke. Make sure it's outside, maybe 4, so it's really big. And then let's see my border colors. So I'm looking for border in my semantic, maybe a subtle. Yeah. That looks great. So basically, I'm on this button, I hover over it, it looks like this. When I click on it, it looks like that. Now let's do the selected state. I'll just duplicate this again, Option and Shift. I'll remove the border, and I think I might just go for a darker surface color. Yeah, that works perfectly. And then the last state is disabled. So I'll copy this, Option and Shift, and then let's look for disabled. So I've got this for my surface, and then my text shouldn't be negative anymore. Do I have negative text? Yeah, there we go. So grayscale text disabled, boom. Perfect. So these are all my primary buttons. Now let's look at how we differentiate this into secondary. I think what I want to do with secondary, and that's something that you see quite a lot, is that the primary button has like the big fill to it, and then the secondary button usually has a lighter fill and it always has a border around it. I'll use my semantic or my kind of like brand colors for my borders, but I'll just use a grayscale background. Yeah, so let's do that. So I'll select all of them apart from disabled because that one's a bit different, so I'll look at it at the end, and I'll give them actually all the same background. So I'll scroll down until I get to my just grayscale colors, and I might just use the default background. Yeah, obviously the text isn't working now, and you can see from the selection colors, because they're all using the same one, I can just select them from here. So I'll select text negative, and then I think this one is title body. There we go. So I'm using my body color as the text. And then let's just add some borders because obviously you can't really see it. So for the default one, again, we need default hover, focus, selected, disabled. So for the default one, how about we go for a default border? Yeah, that works. Then when you hover over it, maybe I will give it, let's see if lighter works. So I'm going to search for border, and then actually, you know what? Let's go with darker. So this is how it looks when you hover over it, you get that darker kind of background. Then I think we can leave selected just as it is. It kind of works and it follows along with how this one looks. Then for the selected, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add the same stroke as I used for my default one. So I'm going to use the default one, but make it 1 pixel. And then I think I'm going to change the background maybe to the subtle. No, that looks a bit disabled. What if I use, yeah, so let's use the brand color, the subtle one. Perfect. So now you can see the difference between this one and this one. You can tell that this one is selected and this one isn't. If you want, you can even go for a bit of a darker shade, but I think I'm kind of happy with that. Then for disabled, I might actually change this to the subtle. Yeah, so I've changed disabled to a subtle background instead of the disabled one, just because it makes it fit a bit more with the rest of the secondary ones. So now we've built all of our buttons, we've colored them. The next step is variable it. So now we're going to create some tokens for these buttons, and these tokens are going to help us set the border radius, the padding, the size of the icon, the spacing between the items, all of that. In the file, I've put this little button token table for you. These are the tokens that we're going to use. You don't have to use these exact numbers, but these are just the ones that I kind of scoped out for myself. So let's start creating these variables. Go into local variables, and because we've been working on this file for a while, we do have some stuff here. I keep saying that you don't have to have any of this, but I would really recommend having this number scale as a primitives. I previously used like 3 extra small, 2 extra small, etc., but I decided to change the primitives to just the name of the actual value to make it a bit simpler. But I would recommend having this kind of scale of numbers to pull from and call out to rather than typing the numbers in, because then you can control it later on. So I'm going to create a new collection, and I'm going to call it O4 component tokens. And these are just going to be tokens that control different components along the way. I'll create my first number variable, and in our case, we are going to use 3 different modes. So we're going to create a small, medium, and large mode. If you're on the free Figma plan, you don't have access to modes yet, so you've got a few options. Number 1, you can sign up to the professional plan using the link in my description, or you can just use groups instead of modes. So just create a small group, a medium group, and a large group, which kind of works the same. It's just that modes make it a bit quicker to swap between them. Our first variable is going to be radius. So I'm just going to call it radius. Then let's click on this plus to add the modes. So this mode will be small, medium, large. And then I'm just going to call out to my aliases. Now, we also created some sizing tokens in a previous video where we already set up what radiuses we want to use in our file. So I am kind of going to reference those that are referencing a primitive. So it's 3 levels of referencing. So for the small one, I decided I want to use an 8, which is a medium. So I'll look for my radius, medium. Then in the medium one, I want to use a large. So radius large, which is just a 12. So if you're not using all of this, just put in 12. And then for large, I want to use the extra large, which is 16. Great. Let's create the next one. So spacing. Then in here, I'm going to select number 4. So I'm going to call out to my number scale, choose 4, which is a primitive, then 8 and 12. Just going to go ahead and do all of these. So now that I have all of these, the last thing I like to do, and if you've seen my previous videos, you know I love to do this, is I'm going to use scoping. Scoping basically means we're going to limit where we can see these variables in the design panel. So for example, radius, I'm not going to use the radius small or medium or large variable for anything other than radius. So I'm just going to untick this and only tick corner radius. For spacing, I'm going to just untick and select gap. So gap basically means anything that has to do with auto layout. Same for these H and V paddings. I'm only going to use them for auto layout. Full padding as well. I can just remove it from everything and only use it for auto layout. And then icon size is what I'm going to use for the width and height. So just width and height. Done. So kind of step 2 of variable it is we need to actually apply these variables. So let's do that now. I can actually select all of them at the same time and just apply it. So let's start with a corner radius. I'll click on my variable button and then scroll down to component properties, radius, apply. Great. Now the spacing, I'll select the drop down, apply the spacing variable. I'm applying the H padding, applying the V padding, and then I need to just go back and change this one because this is why I created that full padding variable, because if you select just the H and the V, they look different. It's more of a rectangle. I want it to be kind of a perfect square. So I'm just going to change this to full padding and full padding. Great. So I've just realized I think my full padding is a bit too big, so I've changed it here to 8, 12, and 16. Let me just adjust that in the local variables as well. Yeah, great. So you see now it's kind of the same height as everything else. Great. So I've done that. The last thing I need to do is the icon size in order to select all of these stars at once. And this is another reason why I recommend having your icons as components. When I select one of these and then I command and slash, I'll have the quick actions menu. And I can say select all with, and I'm going to select all with same instance. That's just going to select all of the stars on the page. So I'll go into this drop down now and apply a variable, and you can see how scoping is so useful because this is the only variable that I scoped for width and height. I can only see that one. So I'll select that and apply the icon size. Perfect. So now that I've done that, I just want to look over here and remind myself that I also have a pill version of these buttons. And I'll just duplicate all of my buttons. So holding down Option and Shift, I'll just drag it out. This is going to be the false version of the pill, so it's not a pill. And then this one, instead of using the component token radius, I'm just going to use my full radius token from before, which is just 999, which will forever create either a circle or a pill shape. The next thing is we just need to do small, medium, and large. So because we used modes, we can switch it like that. So these are my small ones, right? I'll select them and duplicate. So holding down Option and Shift, drag it out. And then in the design panel, in the layer section, I've got the change variable mode button. I'll click on that. Under component tokens, I'll change it to medium. See how everything grew? Duplicate it again, and then select large. Boom. Okay, so everything just grew. I already have my 240 buttons just like that. That was so quick and simple. The last thing I need to do is just go in and change the labels. So I want to connect all of the labels to a text style. I could just select all of them and then click on enter to select the children, enter again to select the children. So I basically selected, the lowest kind of child, which is the text or the vector stroke, but it doesn't affect the stroke if I do select a text style. So from my text styles, I'm going to use for my small buttons, I'll probably use the regular subtitle. So it is a smaller button. Then for my medium buttons, let's select all of them, enter, enter. So I'm selecting the text. And then I'll probably use my body. So yeah, 16 points. Great. And then for large, I'll probably use my headline, which is a 20. So I've got some jumps over here. Great. So I've got my 240 buttons. The next step is name it. Now, name it and component it are kind of sibling steps. If you've ever created a component before that does have variants to it, you know that the variants basically name the component. So if the variant is type and the different values are primary and secondary, the different variants will be named type equals primary, type equals secondary. Now, I always like to name everything first, and then when I change it into a component set, the variants will just be there already. If you prefer to do it the old school way, create everything into a component set and then just add the variants and assign them, you can do that, but I'm going to teach you the naming way. If you don't want to name it, just skip ahead to components to do it the old school way. So I've just organized them a tiny bit, and I would really recommend to take a second to do this step because we're going to select them kind of individually, and we want to have them spaced out a tiny bit so it's easier to select the correct ones. So let's start off by looking at our first property, and this is where this table is going to really help us. So the first variant or the first property these buttons are going to have is their type. So I'll select all of the buttons and then Command R, my handy battery naming tool. I'm going to rename all of them to type equals. Now type equals is the start, right? They're all going to have type equals and then whichever value they have for that property. Now the two values are primary and secondary, so I'll select all my primary buttons, Command R, and then current name. If I click on this current name button, I'll get a $sign and an ampersand, and basically that's saying I'm going to use whatever name they have now and then add on to it. So current name and then primary, because all of these are our primary buttons, and then select all of the secondary buttons, Command R, current name, secondary. So now you can see on the layers panel as well that all of them are named type equals primary or secondary. The next property we want to add is the state. So I'll select all of them, Command R, current name. Now to separate between the properties, we need a comma. So you start off with a comma, space, and then state equals. So we're giving that second property. Now I want to select all the default ones. So all of these are the default ones, and I'm holding down Shift. All of these are the default ones, right? Default primary, default secondary. Command R, current name, and then default. Now the hover state, that's the second row of each. Command R, current name, hover. Now we need focused. Now let's go on to the next property. So select all of them and then Command R. Don't forget current name, then we need to separate for the next property. So we add a comma, then pill equals. So these ones aren't pill shaped. So Command R, current name and false. Then these ones are pill shaped ones. Command R, current name true. Now the next one is the size. So I'll select everything, Command R, current name, comma, size equals. Our very last one is the icon. So I'll select all of them and say current name, comma, icon equals. Perfect. So now we've renamed them all. This is step 7, componented, moment of truth. I will select all of my buttons, create a component set. Yay! Okay, so you see once I created that, all of them here are just ready to go, which means if I select one of them, I'll just copy it out, Option and Shift, drag it out here. This is a fully ready to go button, secondary, primary, focus state, pill, not a pill, large. So yeah, everything is already there, okay? And it makes it just a lot simpler, I think. So now we have these 240 buttons in one, which is quite incredible, I think, and we did it in a really short amount of time. The kind of second half of componented is that I do need to add a few component properties. If you remember in our table, we did say that label is going to be a text component property and that icon is going to be an instance swap. So the way to do that, I'll just select my button component set, go into properties and then add a text component property, and I'm going to call it label. The default value is just going to be label. Now I need to assign this component property to all of the text on the page. So the best way to do this is, again, using that quick selection menu. In order to do that, you do need to remove everything else from the page. So I'm just going to Command X these. I'll just select one of the text boxes and then Command and slash to get the quick menu. And I'll just say select all text layers. Now this wouldn't work if there was anything else on the page, it would select that as well. But because this is alone on the page, I can just select the text over there. And then in the design panel, next to text, I will have this component properties button, and I'll apply the text property label. Great. It doesn't change anything. I did have a non-capitalized L before, so it did change that. But what that means is if I have an instance of this button, I can change the text from the design panel. I don't have to do it from the button itself. The other one, let's just see where it was. Yeah, and then the last one is the instance swap. So in order to do that, I'll do it the other way. You can either create the component property and then assign it, or you can create the component property on the actual element. So I'll do it that way. I'll select one of the stars, make sure that you're selecting the instance and not the vector inside of it. So select the instance, Command and slash, and then select all with same instance. So it will select all of my stars. And then in the design panel, next to kind of the drop down that shows me which instance I'm using, I have the components property button. I'll select that and say I want to call this icon. I actually need something before the icon, so I'm going to add a little emoji just because I already have a variant called icon, so I can't have a variant and a component property with the same name. And then the preferred values, just make sure to minus that. If you have the star already there, it means that that's the only one they can choose. So I'll minus that. I'm using this instance, create the property. Great. And again, all this means is if I have an instance of this button that has an icon in it, obviously now the icon is set to none, so I'm not going to see the instance swap. But if I change it, let's say to left, now I see the icon instance swap over here, and I can change it, let's say to tree or upload. And that's just because of the way I have my file set up. So all the icons are components. And if I change it, let's say to large, you'll see that icon grow because it is connected to the variable. So the last thing that's left is prototype it. Now don't hate me, but I'm going to leave prototype it to the next video. This has already been a packed video, so the next one is just going to focus on prototyping, and we're going to look at how we use component interactions to create prototyping on this level. So anytime anyone uses this button, whenever they hover over it, it will change to hover it. Wherever they select, it will change to selected. So that's it for today. Make sure to subscribe and hit that bell button so you're notified when that next video comes along. I hope you enjoyed. Leave a comment below. Let me know how you're getting on. See you at the next one.